In the Zohar in this week's Parsha, it's explained one of the milos, one of the qualities of Balei Tshuva over Tzadikim Gemurim. And what it says is, by the Tzadikim Gemurim, their avodah is in a way of ascending in a very orderly fashion from one day to the next, from one level to the next. As it says in our Parsha, V'Avram Zokein Bo Bayomim, that means Avram is coming in days, that means he comes with all of his days. Similarly, in the Haftorah of the Parsha, in the Haftorah of the week, we have HaMelech David Zokein Bo Bayomim. So it's a lifelong process of ascents, until finally they come in their avodah to the ultimate closeness and connection to Hashem. Whereas by Balei Tshuva, the Zohar says it's b'shaita chada, b'yoyim chada, b'riga chada, kreivin legabe kutsha brichu. That in 1 hour, in 1 day, in 1 rega, they become close to Hashem. Now this term rega, there's probably no exact English translation for it. 1 moment, 1 instant, 1 second. In fact, in the Gemara there's a discussion of how small a rega is. So we're just going to perhaps just use the word rega. So the Rebbe quotes his father in his Ha'aris on Zohar, in Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, and there the Rebbe's father asks that seemingly these 3 time frames that are given are not being given in order. It should have said first yoima, first a day, then a sha'ah, an hour, and then a rega, and you would then say that each later one is a bigger novelty, is a bigger chiddush than the previous one. You would say not only a day, but even an hour, not only an hour, even an instant, even a rega. So why is it going in the order of first yoim, first sha'ah, then yoim, and then rega? The Rebbe's father also asks, if tshuva in 1 rega is enough, then what's even the point of mentioning that a shah or a yoim is enough to do tshuva? The Rebbe's father explains that there are really 3 levels of tshuva which are connected and they touch 3 different areas of the spheros. There's one that's associated with the level of malchus, one that's associated with the level of Zah, stands for Ze'er Anpin. These are the midos, the emotional aspects of the spheros, Chesed, Gvura, etc. And then there's one that touches the level of Bina, as it's discussed in Lekutei Torah and the Maimer of Matoivu, and he says, Ayin Sham, look over there. And the Rebbe brings from the Lekutei Torah that there is a level of tshuva, which is more about sur meira, staying away from bad. This level of tshuva is the level that touches and reaches the level of malchus. There's a higher level of tshuva, which is about va'asei toiv, doing positive, and that level of tshuva reaches the spheros of zah. And finally, there's a higher level of tshuva. We have in the pasuk sur meira va'asei toiv, then it says bakesh shalom, seek peace. And this is the idea of limud HaTorah. And this one reaches in the level of bina. That's what's explained in Lekutei Torah, these 3 levels of tshuva. And then the Rebbe's father continues and says, and this is what's represented by these 3 expressions. When it speaks about b'shaita chada, in 1 hour, that's the level of malchus. Because malchus is called sha'ah. The level of yoim is related to zah, because zah is referred to as yoim, as day. And finally, the level of rega is related to the union of bina. So here the Rebbe's father does not go into the details of why each one is called by these names, but the main point being is that the order of these 3 things in the Zohar, these 3 time frames in the Zohar, is going from, they are going in order according to the spheres, going from Malchus to the higher spheres of Zah, and finally to the highest level of Bina. Says the Rebbe, at first glance it seems that according to the biur of my father, of the Rebbe's father, so these 3 expressions, b'shaita, b'yoyma, and b'rega, are primarily referring to not a specific time frame, a specific amount of time on the simple level, but rather we're speaking about 3 levels of tshuva, and they are hinted in these 3 words, shaita, yoyma, and rega, because they're associated with, again, shaita being malchus, yoyma being zah, and rega being bina. And this is why in the Zohar they say in this order, because it's just going in the order milmato l'mayla, from the lowest sphera upwards. But the Rebbe says it's not so glottic, it's not so smooth to learn that that's all what these three things are referring to, because the Rebbe says ein inyan yoytze midei pshutoy. In other words, we have to say that these three tshuvos, yes, they are connected to these three levels of malchus, zoh, and bina, but they're also each connected to the specific time that each one represents, which would mean that the tshuva of sur meirah, which reaches the level of malchus, the lowest level of tshuva, this is the one that actually happens on the clock, so to speak. Also is the one that's related to b'shaitachad, not only because of its Kabbalistic connection, but it's also connected to that time, the amount of time of a shah. The higher level of tshuva, va'asei toiv, which reaches the spheros of zah, is connected to the amount of time of yom echad, of one day. And the highest level, bakeh shalom of Torah, would reach that reaches in bina, is achieved in one instant, in one rega. Says the Rebbe, so we need to understand the fact generally that about tshuva is able to so quickly enter, go in, and cleave to Hashem, connect to Hashem, is because the whole idea of tshuva in its very, very essence and its very character is about going beyond order, levels, etc. It doesn't go in an orderly fashion. That is, that a person that was previously in a negative state is now, through tshuva, able to, with one big jump, with one big leap, able to go from one extreme to the other, from a complete opposite situation to fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs and connecting to Hashem. So the Rebbe asks, since it's coming from such a place in the nefesh, such a place in the soul, that's not limited according to the normal orderly fashion, and this is why it's not connected to a specific amount of time, but right away, immediately, the Yid could go in and do tshuva. But if that's the case, the problem is, how does it make sense that the higher level of tshuva, which is va'asei toiv, out of the sur meirah and asei toiv, so a higher level of tshuva would mean that there's a person is having even a deeper level of his oiderus tshuva. It's coming from a deeper part inside of himself. So why would that take a longer amount of time than the lower level of tshuva? In other words, again, the lowest level of tshuva, sur meirah, was saying, is taking one shah. The higher one is taking a yom, is taking a day. The highest one, once again, is taking a rega, is taking a very short amount of time. But the question is about these two lower ones, why is the higher level of tshuva taking longer? Similarly, says the Rebbe, we can ask regarding the spheres themselves. It's known that all of the inyanim in Olam Hazeh are all coming from, they result and they come from the things that they are that are up above, and that's why they are similar to them, because they're coming from the spiritual realm. Furthermore, the whole purpose in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual worlds, is all for the purpose of this lowly world. And if that's the case, how does it make sense that the higher level, which again would be the midos, the levels of Zoh, are the ones that are called yoimo, which is a day, and the lower level, which is malchus, is the one called shaita, which is an hour? Where if yoima is a longer amount of time than shah, so the question is, seemingly, if you're in a higher sphere, you're seemingly more removed from time, more above time. So therefore, seemingly it should be the other way around, that the higher up you are, it should be a shorter amount of time. So why is it that specifically Zoh, the higher spheros, are the ones that are a longer amount of time, and Malchus, the lower one that's more connected to the world and time, is the one that's a shorter amount of time? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by first prefacing that generally when we speak about kitzur and arichus, when we speak about something being shorter and longer, in an intellectual concept, which one of these two are actually greater and higher? Is it something more brief or something more elaborate? So we find seemingly two different aspects. There's two ways of looking at it. In different areas we seem to find different ways of which one is higher and greater. On the one hand, we say kitzur, to be brief, is much greater than arichus. The Rambam writes regarding the words of the Mishnah that they are organized in a way that they are davar kotzer, they're written very briefly, but in the brief words of the Mishnah, they include so many ideas. Whereas Gemara is written in a much longer way. So too, is the same thing is said also in regards to the Acharonim versus the Rishonim, that the Acharonim have to explain much more in detail, much more than the earlier generations. Or to put it in a little bit of a different way, when we have a logical idea, as it is in its original root and its original source, that's where it's going to be more bekitzer. The concept of arichos is when you're trying to bring it down to a lower level to the recipient. So, for example, coming from the Mishnah to the Gemara, the Mishnah was able to be written briefly. You're trying to bring it down at a lower level, that's where you have the arichos. And so too from the Gemara, later to the later generations, to those that learn later, and the authors in later generations, again, in later generations, there's going to be more barichos, which seems to be implying that kitzur is a greater and higher level. On the other hand, Chazal tell us, a person should teach his Talmud specifically in a short and a brief way. And the simple reason for that is because the Talmud, the student, is not going to be able to take all of the arichos, all of the breadth of the intellectual concept of the ideas. And therefore you have to give him over just the brief points, which are going to be fitting according to his ability. In other words, from this it seems to be that the idea of kitzur, the idea of just saying something brief, is connected with the idea that the Talmud seichel is much more limited and much lower than the Rav. So which way is it? Is it the higher one that has more kitzur? Or is it the lower down you need more kitzur? Says the Rebbe says the explanation is it all depends in regards to which level we're talking about. That means when we're speaking about a situation of the relationship between two different worlds completely, levels that are completely removed from each other, very distant from each other. For example, the difference between the Mishnah and those Tanoim and those in the Gemara, the Amoraim, or the Gemara versus the Rishonim versus the Acharonim, and the like. So when we're speaking about two completely different worlds, two completely different realms, then the higher the seichel is going to be, the more bekitzer it's going to be. Why? Because in the higher place, where you have the very, very essence of the logical idea in a much more revealed in an open way, where you could sort of see the truth right away, so therefore, kitzer is enough. The lower it has to come down, if it's going to go down now to another world, so to speak, to a completely different realm, you have to have that same svara is going to need much more clarification, elaboration, so that it should be able to be understood. The Rebbe gives an example, similar to the idea of shmiya and re'iyah, hearing something or seeing something. That which you could see with your eyesight in one split second could take a very, very long time to then describe or for a person to be able to grasp with his sense of hearing. So again, these are two different worlds. The world of eyesight being so much higher and greater that with 1 second you can just see it all. So again, when we're speaking about two worlds that are completely far from each other, two realms in wisdom that are so far from each other, that in the higher place it's going to be seen much quicker in an instant, or in a much shorter amount of time, with much less words. In the lower world, the same idea is going to have to be elaborated with many more words. But when you have an idea within the same world itself, in other words, generally they are not so far from each other. They're both within the same realm. So here it's actually going to be the other way around. That the higher svara, the deeper svara, is going to need more elaboration, more arichas, in order to really be able to bring it out and to be able to understand its depth, its greatness, etc. Whereas something much simpler within that general realm, you're able to explain it much more brief because it's something so simple, so you need less explanation. Or to use again the examples that we said before. When we speak about Mishnah versus the Gemara, so we said before that in the Mishnah it's brought out very, very briefly the deep ideas compared to the way the Gemara is going to elaborate and try to explain it, because these are two far worlds from each other. But within the world of Gemara itself, so clearly the svaras that are going to be deeper svaras, deeper ideas, are going to be discussed with greater arichos than the simple ideas and the simple logical things that you just have to mention very few words for. It's very bekitzer. Says the Rebbe, the same thing we can now apply in our case in regards to tshuva. Generally, the three levels of tshuva that we said before, just to remind again, there's sur meira, asay toiv, and the idea of limud HaTorah, could really be divided into two groups. There's the first two levels, which are generally called tshuva tatah, the lower category of tshuva, the lower world of tshuva. That's going to be sur meira and asay toiv. And the third category, which is now a second group, is going to be called tshuva ilah. And the Rebbe says, just like simply, sur meira and asay toiv are both within one world, in the world of action. We're either doing something or holding ourselves back from doing something. But the next group, or the next category, which is the third tshuva, or the second group, Bake Shalom, is Limud HaTorah. This is already the world of moichin, of intellect. So these are our two worlds that we're speaking about, and then we're going to see how within one world, we also have the two levels. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the tshuva that's in the higher world, in the world of moichin and intellect, this is the one that's the most brief. In one rega, in one instant, 1 second. Because in the higher world of Seichel, things are much more revealed, things are in a much more open way, and therefore you don't need arichos, you don't need lots of time. So that's this highest world. But when we come now to the next two tshuvos of sur meira and asay toiv within the one world of action, it's actually going to be the other way around. The higher of the two, v'asay toiv, the higher darga, is going to take a longer amount of time. And that's what we call it yom echad, like 1 day. Again, using the example of the Gemara, within Gemara itself, the deeper svaris of Gemara are going to need more elaboration. Whereas the lower level, sur meira, is going to take only that one, the shaita chada, the one shah, the 1 hour, let's call it, compared to the yom, similar to the more simple ideas in the Gemara, which for them is sufficient, less explanation. And the Rebbe says, in fact, this idea that sur meira is going to take less time than asay toiv, the Rebbe says, even b'pashtos, even simply, that's the way it works. That in order to do something, a positive action v'asay toiv, is going to take a much longer amount of time than sur meira, which is not doing something, doesn't really take time. And the Rebbe says the same thing is true in the spheros. Let's look at the spheros now. We said there's bina, and then there's zah, and there's malchus. So the sphere of Bina, this is generally in the world of intellect. And Chassidus explains that the world's olam generally are more connected to the midos of Hashem, to Hashem's, the emotional attributes of the spheros, starting from Chesed downwards, the spheros of Zoh. The world of intellect is completely higher than olam, so it's like a totally different world. This is the one that's called a rega, like 1 instant, 1 second, because the godly light is shining over there, so open, so revealed. Therefore, again, things are in the most briefest way, because everything is clear. Whereas in the spheres of Zoh and Malchus, which are already both connected to the worlds, they're more about the midos. So now we have Yoima and Shaita, we have the two ideas of a day or an hour, not like the Rega, which is basically a second. But within the spheres itself, within the midos itself, Zoh is higher than Malchus. Like we said before, the deeper ideas in the Gemara are going to take longer. And therefore, Zoh is the one that's called the higher one, is going to be called the Yom, and Malchus is going to be the one that's called Shah. Says the Rebbe, according to this explanation, based on what the Rebbe's father said, that these 3 Lashonis in the Zohar hint to 3 levels of tshuva, we could also explain, according to Chassidus, another version in the Zohar, the version of the Ramak. And then in the Zohar, there are actually 4 expressions, 4 levels. There's b'shaita chada, b'yoyma chada, and here is the new one, b'zimna chada. Zimna just means in one time, and b'riga chada. So the Rebbe goes back to Likutei Torah for a minute. In Likutei Torah, it's explained that although we said generally there are the 3 levels of tshuva, but really, more specifically, there's actually another level. There's a 4th level, a higher level. We spoke about the ones reaching up to Bina, but there's another level that actually reaches the level of Chachma. And in Avodah, in practical Avodah, this would be what we call Kadesh Atzmacha B'Mutalach, when a person sanctifies himself, makes himself holy, even in the things that are permissible for him. Says the Rebbe, we can explain that this 4th level is hinted This fourth level that the Alter Rebbe speaks about in Tshuva is hinted in the fourth expression that the Zohar has according to the Girsa of the Ramak, where he speaks about Bezimna Chada. How so? So till now we seem to think that Rega is the smallest amount in time. But even in Rega, there is still some discussion how long a Rega is. The Gemara actually asks, the Kamo Rega, and how long is a Rega? So one thing the Gemara says is one out of a whole long cheshbon of how the fraction of an hour, how long a Rega is, ends up being a fraction of a second. And then there's another thing the Gemara says, Rega is as long as it takes to say the word Rega. Say those three letters. But the bottom line is, even Rega has a certain measurement. But what's Zimna Chada? What one time? That's completely not defining any measure of time at all. You're just mentioning the actual concept of time. So it says the Rebbe, according to what the Alter Rebbe says there in L'Kutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe says an interesting thing, that even though usually in most places we only speak about 3 levels of tshuva, that is because, although we just said there's a 4th level, that's because the 2 of them correspond to Chachma and Bina. And in Kabbalah and Chassidus it says that Chachma and Bina are like 2 friends that never separate. And therefore the 4th one is usually just part and included in the 3rd one. But now we can understand why the regular, popular version of the Zohar, there's 3 expressions, because usually we speak about 3 levels of tshuva. But since sometimes we also speak individually, specifically about this 4th level of tshuva, therefore there's also a girsa that specifies also this level of tshuva, the Zimna Chada, which represents the shleimus of tshuva.